And we are live.
Just so you know, the one for
Yeah.
you can pick up a trail map. But the first thing you might want to do is to go in and do.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my show. A tour basically through the lands of the Lost Villages. I will be giving you an armchair tour through the villages that were lost in the inundation of July 1st, 1958. I lived through that time. I grew up on a family farm just north of the village of Molinet. At the time of the Seaway, there were, I think, 7 kids in the family. The 8th child his name was Lawrence, and you can understand how my mother got that name from the Saint Lawrence River and all the turmoil that was happening. But then she went on to have 4 more. So I'm one of 12. And we didn't have a whole lot of money to go to picture shows and whatnot, but I can tell you one thing, that my parents, and especially my dad, my mom said, I lost a lot of that story because I was home taking care of the babies, but Dad took us, Tom, Jim, and John, I'm Jim, took us to see everything. And the third slide in, I think will show that. That I was at a very, very important occasion, and it's something that's inscribed in my mind only because year after year after year after year, I talked about it. I not only talked about it in my family, but then I became a teacher and I talked about it every year with my students. And then I became president of the Historical Society. Well, I talk about it about 100 times a year. So it's a story that I've been very involved with, and most of the slides that you're going to see tonight are images that I'm well connected to and aware of, and also they are images the best, some of the best in our archival collection. Now we operate a museum, the Lost Villages Museum, 3 kilometers east of Long Sault, and it's just a kilometer. I should be talking miles, but I'm from Canada. A kilometer from Cornwall, just west of Cornwall, the city limits. And we operate a museum. The museum was established in 1992 when I became president, and I'm still president. I did have an 8-year break though. I became a member of parliament for an 8-year period, and I didn't have much time to spend at Lost Villages, but at the museum. But towards the end of the show tonight, you will see clips of what our museum is all about. And very much of the presentation that I give tonight is told in that book right there. Now, you don't have that book. You may not have ordered that book. It is available on Amazon, and it's called A Tour Through the Lands of the Lost Villages. For years, I've been doing bus tours. I've got 3 of them slated for this summer. And our municipality understands that I'm getting up there in years, and they encourage me to get writing and get my book, get my story in book form. So this will be a guide. This is a traveler's guide. That you can take this, and just like on the bus, I talk for 4 hours on the bus. This is the 4 hours plus enhanced history. So this book will be available here at the Antique Boat Museum about the end of July. They ordered 10 of them today, so I'm very happy about that. So looking at this first image, this is, and some who came in very early commented about that the dark blue being the old river, the river as it existed before the inundation. And that inundation day was Dominion Day, July 1st, 1958, when they blew that last cofferdam and flooded 40,000 acres of land. Now that included acreage on the American side. Now you can see that the flooded lands extend from here where the power dam is, between a control dam over here and a control dam up there, up near Iroquois. At Iroquois, you have those 3 dams, and it's a man-made artificial lake. If those dams are completely open, the lake would drain and the old river would form back again. But they're not going to do that, because right here at Cornwall, and this is the city of Cornwall, by the way, that line that you see going up there to Power Dam, to where the Power Dam is right here, that is 2nd Street West in Cornwall. So that's all part of Cornwall today. The next slide, and I was just talking to Pat Lambert, was a resident of Wales, and her daughter is sitting right back here. And when her daughter came up and introduced herself, I said to her, her mother is standing in front of me. She's an image of her mother, but she grew up in Wales. And Pat Lambert has recollections, I don't know if they're vivid, but mine are vivid. I'm a little older than Pat, and I remember this scene. In fact, 3 islands. This is Long Sault Island. You have Barnhart Island over there. That's on the American side, and then the way over at the left, that's Sheik Island. And we always, in the summer, every year, we didn't have a whole lot of money to go to picture shows, but by goodness, we could get up to Sheik Island and have picnics and ball games and whatnot with all our cousins from Cornwall. But this image really gives you an idea of the 2 projects that went on between August the 10th, 1954 and July 1st, 1958. And that is a project to create a new seaway, because the ocean-going boats couldn't get through this little canal here. They had to stop in Montreal and unload onto canalers, and the power potential of the Long Sault Rapids. Now that power potential, it had been used to a degree at Molinet and Mill Rush, which were east of this site by the pioneers, but they knew that if they could harness all the energy from the rapids, that you could create a lot of power. So that's why there was a joint project with the United States, Canada and the United States, going at and building a power dam with 16 turbines on the Canadian side, and that's the Saunders part, and the Moses part on the American side, 16 turbines there. So that's you have 16 turbines on each side generating power. The next is a slide. Now, I was there that day. I can say that's the day that I was there, and you have these 3 dignitaries. My dad was especially excited to go to that event because of that elderly gentleman over on the left. He was our prime minister, Louis Saint Laurent. This gentleman on the right, this happy guy over here, that was Leslie Frost, our premier. And in the middle, you have Governor Dewey of New York State. And they were at Maple Grove being the most easterly of the communities. Now, it was a hamlet. It didn't have a post office, so it was classified as a hamlet. But they were there to turn the sod. And I remember my dad, he was so excited that day. He loved Uncle Louis. He called him Uncle Louis. He wasn't his uncle, but everybody in Canada called him Uncle Louis. He was everybody's favorite old uncle. And Dad was especially excited to get there and see him in person. He had never seen him in person. But the ultimate was that Dad and his 3 sons were in the right place at the right time when he went on a walkabout and we got to shake his hand. And I haven't watched it since. But no, it was, and I don't know what my father's fascination with Louis Saint Laurent was, but I can tell you, being one of 12 kids, Louis Saint Laurent is the one who established the child benefit. My father and mother called it baby bonus, and they got money every month for every kids, and I don't know, all Canadians did. So anyway, I don't know the fascination, but anyway, it was an exciting time. So that was that down at Maple Grove. And that is the first community we come to. Maple Grove is number 3 on here. And it was a long strip farming community. It had a hotel. It had the most historic old home, which Jeremiah French is a United Empire loyalist. Yes, he did come from the States and came up to Canada, remained loyal to the British Crown, and settled at Maple Grove. In fact, his house was right at that creek right there. That was Robertson's Creek. And his son was George Robertson, or his son-in-law was George Robertson. So that creek was named after him. But Jeremiah French established a house at that spot, and it's at Upper Canada Village today, the Robertson House there. So the next slide is the lock. You have the lock right here. And this is, when I said a long strip community, those are farmhouses on the south side of the number 2 highway at Maple Grove. And this building right here, that was the hotel. That was Ernie's Hotel, a great watering hole. And Ernie Runyons was a great sportsman, and he loved to show off sports teams at his hotel. But I remember that site very well as a kid. In order to get to Cornwall, downtown Cornwall, we had to pass this site from Molinette, where I grew up on a farm. These 2 houses were moved from Maple Grove. These were the hydro operators' houses. And when I say hydro, they began making power in our area in 1901 when they built a powerhouse, and we'll see that in a minute. At Mill Rush, they built a powerhouse, and the power was transmitted down to a Maple Grove. And at Maple Grove, it went out into the system. Well, the men who worked at the power distribution center, these are the houses that they lived in. And I remember as a kid, these houses sitting for about, I would say 3 months at least, up on those blocks, up on those skids, on the cribbing. And they sat there, and my dad said, someday they'll be sitting on a street in Long Sault, because they were destined for Long Sault. And sure enough, they were the second, that one over there was the second, and that was the third house moved into Long Sault. The next one, and there's the house after they finally got the basement for it, because they had to construct a new basement. They had to hook it up to a furnace. They had to make sure that there was a bathroom in it, because all the houses that were moved did not have bathrooms in them. They had outhouses, and they had bathtubs where you hauled the water in, just like we did when I was a kid and a little boy, where we had a tub in the back room where we 3 or 4 of us, we can wash in that tub. But anyway, this is it being moved out onto the highway and then moved up to Long Sault. This is the first house that was moved into my town. I live at Long Sault, and I welcome you. Come on down to Long Sault, because that's where the Lost Villages Museum is. But if you're touring into Long Sault and you're on Bethune Avenue, you will see that house. This is the back of it. And I remember that date clearly. In fact, my mother took a photograph, and it's hanging at the Lost Villages Museum, of that house rounding the curve on Bethune Street in Long Sault before it was plunked onto its new foundation. An interesting thing is that I'm now working on well, I'm about to publish my second book. My third book is going to be the history of every Seaway house, the 156 houses that were moved into Long Sault. I have the history of I know the day that was lifted off its foundation, and I know the day it was plunked down on its new foundation. It's not in here, but I have it in research that I've done. So now we come to Mill Rush. Mill Rush was about a mile west of Maple Grove. And Mill Rush was a town that I'm quite familiar with because I went to school at Mill Rush Public School in grade 3 and part of grade 4. On my 10th birthday, on January 29th, 1948, in 58, I turned 10 that day. Now you know how old I am. I turned 10 and we said goodbye to the school. I had a teacher by the name of Fran LaFlamme, my favorite, everybody's favorite, and she became the first president of our historical society. And she's the one that came in 1992 and said to me, I'm going to nominate you as president. And I said, well, Fran, there's only one way that I'll accept, is that if you and the rest work to open that log house as a museum. If nobody's done anything, it's time. So they did. We're now in downtown Mill Rush. This is as vivid to me today as it was way back when I lived it. My aunt and uncle lived upstairs there. And that staircase at the side of this brick building, climbed that many, many times. And I got my hair cut through that door right there because my Uncle Austin's brother, he lived at the back of that building and he was the barber at Mill Rush. We shopped at the IGA and this was Gardner Jeroshi's hardware store. And all those businesses moved into the new shopping center that was built at Long Sault. But this is downtown Mill Rush with a First World War veteran checking out things. Actually, he was one of my brother's godfather, and he lost an arm in the First World War. So he just has one arm. Now, this is the powerhouse. I mentioned that they dammed, and there's part of the dam extending way down here. They dammed the river. Now, not the whole river, not like that Moses-Saunders Dam, but a little piece of the river between an island and Mill Rush. They dammed it and they created power from this powerhouse. And that was in 1901. That act of creating a powerhouse added to the economic development of the community. Because after that, in 1903, I believe it was, yes, it was 1903 that the provincial paper mill was established in that town. There's the powerhouse, an aerial view. I remember that there's the dam right there. And the water on the left-hand side was called Bergen Lake. You can see the canal. And you know, at one time, this land right here was all land right up through there and back into the country. And that channel that you see there was scooped out and it became the old Cornwall Canal. And to get over here, you cross the swing bridge right there. Now, in that, you should be able to, oh yeah, you can see St. George's Chapel right there. And the public school that I went to was right next door. I was an altar boy in that church, and I went to school there. And both parents worked at the paper mill, which was, you can see just a little bit of the paper mill up at the left-hand corner.
Is that looking north?
That's looking north, yes. You know,
And what's the structure to the left there? Is that the new dam, or what are we looking at? What is their road on top of?
This is on a dike that was built.
When was the dike built?
In 1901.
In 1901.
Yeah, they started they just started generating power in that powerhouse.
Okay, so power is about. I got it.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Yeah. The water came in through here, and you can see the gates. There's gates. These gates, actually, this is a very popular dive site today. 75 feet of water over that dive site. And these gates, this one, and you can see one here and here, those gates are still there. The wood is still there with the turbines down underneath. Now they did, this is what the inside looked like, the big generators. There's the powerhouse taken from the downside, looking at the tail race. This is where the water has gone through the building and it came out through those holes or the tail race. And very popular. That's still all in existence except the bricks above. And you'll be able to see that in the next photograph where they have destroyed and they took all the superstructure down and left the bottom as, and today it's a very popular dive site. And every week on Wednesday, I meet with the Lost Villages divers. We have 4 members of our historical society now who are scuba divers, and they dive all over the place. And I'll never be down there because I don't swim that well, so I'm not going to dive. And they have invited me to join their group so that I can tell them what was there before. They tell me what's there now, and we have a great conversation every Wednesday night. I love it. Here is Mill Rush, that area that I was telling you. There's the bridge that you cross over, and the powerhouse is way up at the left there. That was a swing bridge. That was a swing bridge because the boats had to pass through, and the cars had to get over to Sheik Island. The piers for the swing bridge, that pier is still there. In fact, 2 weeks ago, the divers saw the buoys. The buoys are still down under the water. And they told me all about it. So last week, 2 weeks ago, last week, I brought some pictures from our archives and showed them that the buoys were there. But this is the Catholic Church, and the school is next door, right in here. And there's the paper mill right up in here. And here's another view taken from Sheik Island, looking across at the Millrush St. George's Chapel and the schoolhouse. Now, I ask you to fix your eyes on that house. That house was built in 1928. Now, that was 30 years before the flood. 30 years before. Mr. and Mrs. Warner decided that they were going to build this beautiful brick home in Millrush, and they had heard, well, for 50, 75 years, there was talk that there was going to be something happening. But it was something. That's about all that happened until you got into the mid-40s, after the war, into the late 40s, early 50s, that things really got rolling. And that's when Mr. and Mrs. Warner were living in this beautiful home, and they wanted their house moved to Long Sault. That house was moved into Long Sault, as we will see in the next photograph. There it is on the mover.
Wow.
Yes. Now, that was the most photographed home by hydro at the time of the Seaway, only because, number one, it was brick. Number two, they moved it with the chimney and the fireplace. The fireplace was jacked up, and the brick fireplace was moved with the house. And the brick fireplace was right under that chimney. And look at the veranda posts. If you're looking behind that word hartshorn, you can see the veranda posts. The base of the veranda posts are made of brick, and those were moved as well. So it was a feat. This was in the that was moved in 1957 to Long Sault. I owned that house at one time. I was the second owner after Mr. Warner passed away, and after both of them had passed. But they plunked it on its new foundation, hooked it up to a new furnace, put a new step at the front, planted a tree in the front yard, put topsoil down and seeded it, and the rest is history. Mr. Warner just lived there and kept care of that. And today, that at 17 Millrush Road, the people that own that house have given it the same tender, loving care that every owner has done since that time. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And we stop in front of this house on my bus tours that I do, for the simple reason I talk about its history, but right next door to it. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Warner from Mill Rush. We're from Mill Rush. Right next door was Mr. and Miss Ray. Mr. Ray and his sister lived, Bertha, George and Bertha Ray lived next door. Their house was moved from Mullinette. So here were two people, two families that had to get along, who had never been together before. And now what's interesting, the house, during my bus tour, the house on the right-hand side of it, it was a T. Eaton's Company catalog. You could order it from the T. Eaton Company out of Toronto and have it shipped. And it was shipped to the Mullinette station and taken to the site and assembled. It had to be assembled. So here's the paper mill that went into operation it was 1903, between 1903 and 1905. You had the production starting up there. And it was a paper mill that first started making paper through cloth, through rags and garments and whatnot, that recycled clothing and whatnot. And then they went into pulp. But this is the paper mill where both my mom and dad worked. My mom, her mother couldn't afford to send her to high school in Cornwall because she had to take the train and she couldn't afford to send her on the train. So she went out to work. And there she met my dad, who she was 20 when she met a 38-year-old bachelor, and they got married and went on to have 12 kids. So here is the paper mill with its water tower right along the Cornwall Canal, right along Bergen Lake. This is the flooded lands out here. Now we didn't flood. The flood of 1901 was not the massive one. You had the lowlands out in front of Mill Rush and Mullinette flooded. You had the Setzinger grist mill at Mullinette destroyed. It had to go because it was on low land, but it wasn't like the massive relocation and whatnot of 1958. This is a picture and they had recycled paper. These are women working in the sorting room. This is where they sorted the paper and whatnot. And every woman in that picture we have identified. Now, this was my Aunt Golda's sister, and this was Theresa Brownell, and we were scared to death of that lady right there. She used to babysit us, and she was nasty. Poor Aunt Ethel, or Aunt Theresa. There's the paper mill. We now see that the factory is over. The water tower is down, and now we move on. This image is in here. Now, this is in the school that I attended at Mill Rush. I went to school in Mullinette in grade 1 and 2, and then transferred down to Mill Rush in grade 3, and then part of grade 4. This is the schoolhouse that closed in 1914. They built a new one that I went to. In 1914, two folks in Mill Rush bought the school, they split it in two, and they moved them onto lots over in the town, in the downtown part of the town. Those two houses were moved at the time of the relocation, and they're both on the same street in Long Sault. And it's just an example where they didn't waste much, not like today. You know, they get rid of buildings, they bring in a big machine and just claw out the pieces and send it to the landfill. But this is a pre-1914 class. Again, downtown Mill Rush. I put this image in, Mr. Conway and then Mr. Gauzel, for the simple reason we have that sign at our Lost Villages Museum. My dad was the secretary treasurer of the Mill Rush Horticulture Society. He was a horticulturalist, big time. He was a farmer and a mill hand, but he loved horticulture. He loved experimenting with plants, and he became secretary treasurer. And I remember the day, I was with him, the day that he was tasked with removing that sign from this park that was in downtown Mill Rush. And he took it back to our farm, put it in a barn, and it stayed there until he passed away. And we finally had established a museum, and my mother said, that goes to the museum. The cradle upstairs in the shed goes to the museum. And she parted with some of the things that were important to the history of our area. This is the day of the flood. This is Floyd Barkley. Now, here's a man, in fact, Floyd Barkley, set your sights on that, the water rising, because that's under, that spot there today would be under about maybe 30 feet of water. And there's Floyd Barkley, and he was the mover and shaker of anything to do with Mill Rush. President of the Chamber of Commerce, principal of the school. He was into everything. But everybody respected Floyd Barkley, for he stood up against hydro for the widows and the spinsters and the vulnerable in the community who were being taken advantage of. And they were. The very first deals that were made, hydro held those up to others. But here's the man that stood up and said, no, no, no. And he negotiated many fair settlements for a whole lot of people in town. I respect, I have the greatest respect for that man. He built a new public school in Long Sault, where I taught for 22 years. My daughter is teaching there now, and he got everything in his school. Here's a man that had a little room downstairs in Mill Rush Public School with some power tools. He negotiated with hydro, and he got a full shop class with bandsaws, 2 bandsaws, and 3 lathes, and it was amazing what that man could do. It's wonderful. Then we crossed that bridge that I showed you over to Sheik Island. Sheik Island was the site of the powerhouse, and then at the upper end of Sheik Island was the Alt Park. Now, we have Alt Park today. That's where our museum is. It was the replacement park for the one that was up on Sheik Island. This is one of the farmhouses over on Sheik Island that you would pass. I put this in because it's a beautiful big stone structure. It was a big stone house, lovely, as were all the houses on Sheik Island. And 7 of them were owned by Raymond families. Their surname Raymond. And you can see Wilfred Raymond. I think, he's sitting there in the rocking chair and on the swing. And this is what happened to his house. His house couldn't be moved. So that house didn't burn. It looks like it's been torched, right? Perhaps, but it wasn't. It was not torched. He took all the wood out of that house. The grand staircase, the casements around the windows and doors, the baseboards were all incorporated into the new house that he built at Long Sault. And it's a lovely, lovely home there at Long Sault. But today, that's just a pile of rubble underwater. And the divers have been at that site. Up at the head of Sheik Island now, this is at Alt Park, and here we have a First Nations dig. Archaeologists came in and did a dig. I remember as a boy, they had a couple Sundays where you could go up and work alongside archaeologists. So I remember Dad taking, and Mom never did, she was always stuck at home with the babies, but Dad, for this one, he took 5 of us, the 3 boys and my sister Mary and Kathy, and we went up and we participated in the dig, but the 5 of us didn't find a darn thing. But we felt pretty darn important working alongside these big shots that came down from the University of Toronto. And, well, big shots, they were archaeologists who came down, and they were investigating the site of the Point Peninsula people. They predated the Mohawks, which are down in our area today on Sheik Island and in Akwesasne. And there were many, many artifacts found at that site. In fact, we have some artifacts from that site at our museum for the simple reason, after hours, some of the Raymond kids were over and did their own dig and found a few things. And so we have a few of those. I remember Annie Raymond at the auction sale coming to me with this blue box of shards of pottery, and we have it at the museum. Now this is a reporter from the Standard, our local newspaper, Standard Freeholder. This fellow's mother was my grade 1 and 2 teacher. Anyway, he's posing there. He did not participate in the dig. He just had somebody take his photograph because he was covering and he was doing a story, and he did a darn good story on that for the newspaper. Then we come up to Molinet. Now this is the town that I especially knew. And in 1984, I wrote a chapter in our township's history. It was the bicentennial of the no, it was the centennial. 1984, bicentennial of Ontario. And we were invited, some of the old historians and whatnot, and they thought I knew a little bit about Molinet, so they asked me to write the chapter on Molinet. And I could visualize. Now, I was 6 when it started, the project. I was 10 when it ended, but I can picture every house along Main Street. Molinet had one main street, and that was highway number 2, and I could visualize. So I worked with 2 other people, Katie Mullen and Bess Whiteside, and I wrote the chapter. And this is where I went to school. This is where my dad, you'll see my dad's church there, a Methodist church, before he converted to Catholicism and then became a devout Catholic and very staunch with having children. If you know what I mean. But anyway, we lived right up there. If you see that word Molinet, go up above the U, right at the intersection there. The old farmhouse is still standing there today. In pretty bad shape, but it's still standing. But no Brownells own that site today. But this is the church. This is the and the graveyard in behind, and the canal and Bergen Lake in behind that. And that's Sheik Island up in here, which you can see a little piece of Sheik Island. And that was a beautiful church. The brick, that church was built in 1835. It wasn't bricked until 1871. And the brick that was put onto that building in 1871 was made on the farm next door to where we farm. Wow. And yes, I remember when I was a kid, my dad saying, "See that pile of stone over there? That used to be a brick kiln. They used to bake bricks there. And that house right over there was Mr. Animals." He said, "The brick in that house and the brick in that church and the brick in a house over in Sheik Island, all had the same color brick, all had the same kind of brick. It was unique. It was a buff, whitish, very tan type brick. But it was beautiful." But this is where my dad was baptized in the Methodist faith. Here we have a picture of the church interior. Here is the church in its declining days. And you can see they cut the trees here at the front, and they're getting ready to do something with that church after they have the last service. And there is the last service at the church with much of Molinet gone. My Aunt Ethel had an ice cream parlor right over there. It's gone. The houses along this street, gone. A big one over here had been burned. But you can see Snetzinger's house is still standing, and the T. Allen Brown store, and the hotel. The hotel is still standing there. That's the Lion Hotel. But this is the last service, and in behind the church, this section that you see over in here Anybody hazard a guess what that might be?
Cemetery.
It is. That's the cemetery that's been capped. Now, there were 18 cemeteries that were affected. 14 cemeteries, they amalgamated them into Saint Lawrence Valley Union Cemetery. Two cemeteries were moved intact. There was one down at Maple Grove, and they had to move it. It was right at the dam site, so they had to get it out. Every remain exhumed. Everyone exhumed. And then the Lutherans up at near Riverside Heights, which is west of Upper Canada Village, the Lutherans demanded that every remain be moved in that cemetery. But the other ones, I remember the night. Now my grandparents are still out underwater. Curtis and his two wives their remains are still out underwater, because I remember the night that Mr. Hill, chair of the cemetery board, and a man from Hydro were sitting at our kitchen table. My Uncle Scott, who had relocated from Mill Rush into Cornwall, he was there, and my dad, and I remember my dad saying, our parents wanted to be buried at Molinet, that's where they'll stay. So their tombstone was moved to the new cemetery. It's an empty plot right now, but my Uncle Scott's daughter holds the plot. She's the plot holder. But this is a cemetery, and there were 14 capped. There were, now if you wanted your ancestors' remains exhumed, Hydro would do it. You didn't have to pay a penny for it. But there were some people that just felt sacred grounds, that's where they should remain. So two were capped with glacial till. These are huge boulders and whatnot. Now, if you insisted, and you'd had to do it at your own expense, you could put concrete on top of it. Some did. There are a few spots in here where today it's a great boulder field, because when the water came through, it moved all that silt and it left the boulders. But there are some places where you can see that some families had them capped with concrete. And then there were two cemeteries, one at Mariatown and one at Iroquois. Now, neither one of those communities are classified as Lost Village hamlets or villages, because they were up west in Dundas and they're still there. But two cemeteries were raised. That is, all the tombstones were taken off, surveyed and taken off, more fill put in over top of the graves, and the tombstones put back. But you want to know, they really didn't have to do that, because I've been to those two cemeteries many times, and the water is nowhere near. But they were close to the edge of the river, but I think it was just a precaution. Okay, and there's what happened to the church. They burned it. That beautiful church was gutted, and today it's just a pile of bricks. And an interesting thing, last year, one of the divers went down, and one of the divers came to me, he said, is there anything down there that you would like? And now you have to have a license. You have to have a license to take anything with it. And I told Mark, I said, you really have to have a license to take anything with it. Oh, come on. They're all over the place. There's hundreds and thousands of bricks. So nobody's going to miss one brick. I said, well, if there's anything that I would love to see is a brick from Animal's brick kiln. And I knew it would be at that site. Well, lo and behold, he went down, and over here, and we'll see a picture of that house, there was the oldest house in Molinet. And it was a red brick. This wasn't red brick. It was a red brick. He came up with a red brick. I said, Mark, that's not the brick from the church. They weren't that color. So he said, I'll have to go back down again. So he went back down, and he came back with a brick from that church. And it was definitely from that church. It just the way it was made, and you could tell that it was the color that I remember. This is Christ Church. being lifted. This was built in 1837, completed in 1837. Adam Dixon, George Dixon built that brick house that I just talked to you about, but his son, or his brother Adam, built a home that was moved to Long Sault and it's since burned down. But he gave the land and the money to build this church, just like my ancestor, Stephen Brownell, gave the land and the money to begin the construction of the church that we just saw that had been burned. But Adam Dixon, and this house was deemed suitable to move to Upper Canada Village, and there you see it. That's a very famous picture of it being moved. And now this is the Dixon house. This is where the red brick. This is where he got the red brick. But I had a fascination with architecture and history and whatnot from a very early age, because at Monette Public School, this was right behind the school. And I'd go over to the fence and I would just stare at that beautiful brick. I grew up with all these kids in my family. We lived in a 1.5-story farmhouse, relatively small for 14 of us living under one roof. But anyway, those were my high school years. But this big home, amazing. And that's what it looked like in its heyday. The University of Toronto came down just as they did with the archaeological dig for the Point Peninsula people on Sheik Island. They came down and studied this house. And they understood the house as being Georgian plantation. Now, the Georgian is, if you split that house in the middle and fold them up, they're identical. One side is identical to the other. And the plantation are these two little wings that were built off. One was for the kitchen, the other one was for the servants that worked in there. And right up behind those two windows right there was the ballroom. And that house, it was rented out for a few years before the Seaway. That house was sitting it was wide open. Dad took some of us, I don't know how many were in the family went, but I know I was in there, and I remember Dad saying, look at the cornice. I think that's what you call it. He said, look at that decorative molding up there. And you follow that decorative molding. Now, they had split the house up into different rooms. He said, you follow that. He said, that was the size of the ballroom in that house. And, that's how you learn things and you study things. And I'm so glad that I had a dad that did that for me. Now, here's the Pat Lambert's, Dr. Moody's town. Now, it was the only inland lost village. And you can see that there's the old river, the dark blue, and how far north it was. Now, that red little marker over there, that's Dickinson's Landing. Dickinson's Landing was a long strip community. At the very east end of Dickinson's Landing, you had a road going north. That was the lower road. And it brought you into a community before 1860, it was called Dickinson's Landing Station. In 1860, the Prince of Wales came to Canada to inaugurate the Grand Trunk Railroad. He wanted to stop at Dickinson's Landing Station, get off the train, get out to the front, and get on one of those boats. And we'll see that too. The boats that could go through the Long Sault Rapids. He wanted to ride the waves of the Long Sault Rapids, which he did. He got driven out in a beautiful carriage to Calhoun's Wharf at Dickinson's Landing, but he stopped at this little town and he looked around and he said, Dickinson's Landing Station, why does such a small town have such a long name? When they left, they named their town Wales after him. So that's why it went from the longest name to the shortest name of all our lost villages. And this really shows you the reason why, being an inland community, it was flooded. It was on a creek. It was on Hooples Creek. And you can see this is the Stewart farm. This is the Stewart house that was built at, in fact, behind That door and that window right there in that part, that's the original cabin of 1810. When that house was restored at our museum site, that's a restored home, those who worked on the project found the 1810 house buried in underneath the larger house. They added to the house. And there is another house in the same situation, and that's the Robertson House at Upper Canada Village. When you go to Upper Canada Village and you go in the dining room, some of the interpreters don't tell that story, but that was the original log house. This house is buried in under there. It wasn't log, it was slab on slab, cedar slabs piled one on top of the other, and they took clay out of Hubble's Creek and filled the holes with clay. And we've left holes in the walls. We've put plexiglass up so you can see how the house was built in different sections. And here's Wales in its declining days. In fact, now let me see here. Yes, okay, here's Dr. Moody's house. I was trying to, this is where your mom grew up, right in that house, right there. That was Fran LaFlamme and the LaFlamme family that was right next door, Fran being our first president, her father being a barber, her mother being took in laundry and did laundry for folks, and a seamstress. But this was the town in its dying days. You can see a number of houses have been moved from here up in here, and it's going. This is the site of St. David's Anglican Church. There it is, and St. Mark's United Church. And this church today, that church could have been saved. And Fran LaFlamme, she narrated. Luckily, she narrated a documentary before she passed away. And in that documentary, she said, wouldn't it be wonderful for people traveling along the number 2 highway and looking out and seeing a church sitting on the island in the lake? And it could have, but Hydro got rid of it all. That's why in our logo, we have a church depicted in our logo with water over top of it. This is another very popular dive site. This is the railway bridge that was for trains, the Grand Trunk and the Canadian National Railroad. This is the bridge over Hubble's Creek that I showed you previously. And sometimes they lower the water in the lake. They try to keep it at the 240 foot above sea level for the generation of power, but sometimes they lower it. It all depends on the water that's in the upper lakes, because it all has to be staged down. And sometimes the water is so low that you can get out of a motorboat and stand on the deck of the bridge. Fran LaFlamme has done it. JD has not done it, and I don't think I will. And this is a store. This was the Kerr Brothers store. It became the Ransom store, and then it became Ransom and Trimble store. But this is in the horse and buggy day. Beautiful big structure. This is the Conley Hotel. Now, talk about progressive communities. This was a huge hotel right beside the train station. In fact, this was right basically across the street from the Moody House. This was the house. This was Arthur Stewart, Arthur and Mary Stewart. Arthur Stewart, his nickname was Pop, but their house had the distinction of being the heaviest house moved at the time of the Seaway, only because it was a concrete block house. But many of you probably have seen concrete blocks where they have the air holes. There's usually 3 air holes in them. These didn't have air holes in them, and every concrete block was reinforced with steel. And Hydro did not know that when they lifted that thing up with their machine, and Fran in in her narration, in her video, talks about the tires on that machine just about went flat. This is another house. This was the largest, Wales had quite a distinction. Heaviest house, largest single family home. Now, it wasn't the largest structure move, that was up in Iroquois. It was a 15-room nursing home, but this was the largest single family home, and it was moved into Ingleside. And that was the Warren home, then it became the Warren and Rice home, and then it eventually became the Nightingale House bed and breakfast in Ingleside. But the folks that ran it passed away. This is St. David's Anglican Church that could be sitting on its own island today. And those steps, you can still see the outline of the foundation when you go to the island, but those steps are still in existence, but they're awfully eroded today because when you get storms, the water just rushes and it has eroded them over 65 years. Here are people in the basement of that church, and they're looking over plans of what their town could look like and some architectural structures of what the new homes could look like in the community. This is the last structure to exist in Wales, and that was the D.H.C. Smith grist mill. He had a poultry yard, grist mill, apiary, apple orchard. He was into everything. And there is Wales with only the grist mill standing way up there. The whole town has disappeared. We go back out to the front, and we're back out along number 2 highway at Dickinson's Landing. And you can see how close these are to the new community of Ingleside. Here's Long Sault. Now, I should have explained that Mullinett, Millrush, and Maple Grove, the houses that could be moved from those communities went into making Long Sault. The houses from Wales, Dickinson's Landing, Farrens Point, and Altsville, and the hamlets of Woodlands and Santa Cruz went into making Ingleside. So here's Dickinson's Landing. Dickinson's Landing had 180 inhabitants. And now, at one time, Dickinson's Landing had over 1,000 inhabitants because it was a river town. It had a wharf. It was right at the head of the Long Sault Rapids. And river transportation was very important. But guess what? Dickinson's Landing Station developed where the railroad went through. And so the inhabitants there, they migrated back to Dickinson's Landing Station. So as a bonus to Wales developing, Dickinson's Landing had to take a back seat. So there were only 150 people there from a community that had at one time over 1,000. This is a church that I remember very well. I served as an altar boy every second Sunday in that church. Huge big church, and it was just torn down. Some of the wood saved it. We do have that bell at our museum. I went to an auction sale and bought that bell. There was no way that it was going to leave our community. And the fellow that I was bidding against, he came to me after and he said, "Boy, you're really interested in that bell." He didn't know who I was. I didn't know him. And I said, "Yes, I'm the president of the Lost Villages Historical Society, and that's going to our museum." And he says, "Oh," he says, "I'm glad you got it. I was going to take it and I was going to melt it down." Yes. Now, an interesting thing about that door handle that you see right there. I think of the Sundays that my dad would have pulled that door handle open and we walked into that church. Divers found the door handle in the ruins 3 years ago. We have it on display at the museum. Divers found it. And they came and said, "We found it on the site of the church. Do you think it's off the church?" So we took photographs at the museum, magnified them, and sure enough, it's the handle of that door. So that's the fun that we're having as a historical society. We're collecting, we're preserving, we're recording history. There's the school, Dickinson's Landing Public School, And you can see this is the a photograph of the school, and this had to be a staged event. No kids went to school looking that perfect. Perfect. And even the teachers, everybody looked so perfect in there with their hats. So there was a special occasion. We'll never know what the occasion was, but this photograph, this is two fellows from Dickinson's Landing who very, very popular place for sturgeon. There's still a lot of sturgeon down there in the river. The divers have told me how they come face to face with the sturgeon, and they're not the most pleasant looking beasts, but they've seen them. But and people by the thousands. This is right overlooking the Long Sault Rapids. These folks are standing on the canal bank, looking out over the canal, and then beyond is the Long Sault Rapids. And you saw that picture right at the very beginning. So the ground that these people are standing on is still in existence today on the Long Sault Parkway. These little cabins were right along Highway number 2 on that side. You had the highway. That highway is still there, and you can drive them. And when you get on to Macdonald Island, the road dips into the water and then comes up over there. You have a little bay. So Saint Lawrence Parks Commission have made a little detour around. But it's amazing, especially when you're on a bus and people look out and they see that. That's when you understand that there was a flood. You can't help but know that there was a flood in the area. I talked about the Prince of Wales going down through the Long Sault Rapids. He wasn't on this. He was on the Kingston, the steamship Kingston. This is the Rapids Prince. This was the last one that they were constructed in a way that they could go through the Long Sault Rapids. Now, these rapids had to drive them up in order to build the second part of the Long Sault Control Dam. I said there were 3 dams. The Long Sault Control Dam, in order to build the second part of that, they built half of it in building cofferdams around, but the other part of it, they had to drive the Long Sault Rapids. I walked down on the rapid bed with my dad and my brothers. But Captain James Stevenson, he was the last captain of that boat. And he went down himself. And he said, and it's reported, it's in the Standard Freeholder, we have that in our archives. He said, I had to be crazy. But Captain Stevenson said, he took that boat through once, and the very first time he brought it through, he never struck a rock. And from then on, he called that the cellar. He went down through the cellar, but we had all these waves and these huge waves and the thrill of going through the Long Sault Rapids. That was before my time. But it was the whole project, the whole engineering feat was something. To think that in 4 years they dried up this and re-watered it before the actual flood. They re-watered it. Once they got that second part of the Long Sault Control Dam built, they breached the cofferdam that was built, and the water came in, but it was held high now, so you didn't have rapids. So there's the Rapids Prince. There's Captain Stevenson heading down through the Long Sault Rapids on the Rapids Prince and the Cornwall Canal. The boats, the everyday boats, could not go through there. They could not go through there, except these specially, they had fairly flat bottoms on them. An interesting thing, Captain Stevenson now, Captain James Stevenson, Captain James now has a beer named after him. And yours truly has a beer named after him, Jim's Brown Ale. But Captain Stevenson, we have a brewery now, the Lost Villages Brewery, in just around the corner from the museum. And the owners of it, I've been working with them right from the beginning with regards to naming the beers. And they came to me and they wanted to name a famous person. And I said, you know, Captain James Stevenson, his story is going to be lost if we don't get it out there in the public. I said, put his picture on a beer can and a little story on there and the rest. So I said, now I don't know if the Stevensons are teetotalers or not, but I said, I will check for you. Well, I called the son of one of the Stevensons, and he said, we would be honored. He was a young fella, and he says, maybe some of them were teetotalers, but we would be honored. So he's got a beer. He's got his portrait is on the beer can. Just had to throw that in, because if you're ever down in our area, check out the Lost Villages Brewery. We've got some great beers there. This is the Long Sault Rapids. The Long Sault Rapids never froze in the winter. So those farmers over here on Sheik Island, they had a microclimate. They had gooseberries. Keitha Raymond wrote about that in the history book that I wrote, the chapter on Molinet. She talks in her chapter on Sheik Island about having gooseberries on that island long before they had them on the mainland, only because this water never froze and you had the heat from the water having an influence, a microclimate on that island. But you can see the Cornwall Canal is frozen. Here is Dickinson's Landing, and you can see that the population, well, there's nothing there. It's gone. Santa Cruz was a little hamlet west of Dickinson's Landing. Santa Cruz, meaning Holy Cross, Spanish, Portuguese. And it's believed that it was named by the stonemasons, that they had an encampment there. And the stonemasons had come from Spain and Portugal and established a little community, and they named it Santa Cruz. That is the legend that we express. Santa Cruz, and I only put this in because they worked on the stonework along the old locks and canals. But the only public building that was there at the time of the Seaway in Santa Cruz was this schoolhouse. That was the only building. There were some farmhouses along the Nugget Highway, but the only structure that was there was this schoolhouse. And then we just, well, a stone's throw from Santa Cruz, you had Woodlands. Woodlands receiving its name from the many ships that stopped there to load with cordwood. They burned wood in their boilers, so they stopped there, and the folks that lived in the area called it their community Woodlands. And Woodlands today, if you're on the Long Sault Parkway up near Ingleside, the other new village, you will come to McLaren Island. This is the McLaren farm, and this land right back in here is a camping island today on the Long Sault Parkway. Beautiful parkway. If you've never been down east in our area, come on down. Come on down. We've got some great establishments for accommodation. We have much to see, and I'd love to show you around the Lost Villages. Just let me know. You can always reach me by sending a message to lostvillages.ca. It's not easy to remember. Lostvillages.ca will get you to a page where you can leave a message. Woodlands didn't have a whole lot of people, but it had a whole lot of graves right along the river, back along the river. Some of my ancestors were moved. Their remains were there, and their tombstones moved. Here is a family watching the water rise up over Woodlands. They lived closer to Farron's Point than Woodlands. Farron's Point, the second, before we get to Altesville, we have Farron's Point, named after Curtis Farron. And its claim to fame was the lock that was there. Boats could get down the river. There was a minor rapid out in front of Farron's Point. Boats could go down the river. Now, you have to think, too, that there was a 90-foot drop from Iroquois to Cornwall. 90-foot drop. That's why you had the Long Sault Rapids bubbling where they bubbled. But here at Ferens Point, you had a minor rapid at the front. Boats could get down, but they never had enough power to get back up. So they had to be locked from east to west. This boat is heading west. In this picture, you can see the lockmaster's little shanty right in there. And then up on the hill over there, that's the Women's Institute pavilion that they built. And that pavilion was saved, it was moved, and it's at our county fairground today. It almost disappeared, but Fran LaFlamme put down her foot and said, there's no reason to get rid of it, and there's more reason to preserve it. So the county fair preserved it. There's a colored picture of the same thing, the boat going through. You can see the little red roof peeking out behind the tree there of the lockmaster's house, and then the pavilion with its red roof. Then you have these two ladies, Mrs. Morel and Patricia Blair, yeah, at the lockmaster's house, and here it is being raised. They couldn't move it, they couldn't get it up the hill, so they had to burn it. And these two men worked on the lock at that spot last days. And here's downtown Ferens Point. It was a lovely, beautiful, tree-lined main street. That's highway number 2, going right through the town. This was Ferens Point's famous building. This was Buckingham Palace, and it was known as Buckingham Palace. Everybody talked about Buckingham Palace in Ferens Point. My sister-in-law, who just passed away in January, she was born in Ferens Point, and she often mentioned about the Kerr brothers and then the Moyles having Buckingham Palace. Well, it was known as that because it had a cupola on top, that beautiful woodwork. You can't really see it in underneath here. It had the dormers and whatnot. It was just a lovely brick building, and there's an artist's sketch of it. And then we head to Altsville, the most westerly, where just about finished of our villages. And it was known for its wharf. It had a government wharf. It had a house just up on Nelson Street where anybody that came from the United States had to go and check in at the they didn't pay tolls, but at the customs house. That's what I'm looking for, at the customs house. But this was the wharf, very popular site for not only goods being transported from Louisville Landing, New York, across the river, but it was a popular swimming spot. This is a picture of the first ferry that crossed from Louisville Landing to Altsville and back. And we do know the two people on that boat. We don't know the name of the horse, but I know that my sister-in-law, who just passed away, that's her grandfather right over there. And this is my ancestor, Napoleon Brownell. Pole, they called it. And poor Pole. And you can see it's a two horsepower ferry. Poor Pole didn't, he lost his
treadmill, the horses.
Yeah, they're on a treadmill. You can see them kind of standing on a treadmill there. Yeah. He lost his life on that ferry. He fell and hit his head in the wharf. This is, now, Altsville was a 2-part town. It had the main part out at the highway, and then you had about maybe a third of a mile north of the community, you had the industrial part. And this is the entrance to the industrial park. This is Jarvis and Shaver's store. And you had, I think it was Mr. Hollister, but you had a road up between here, and it went up to the train station, the coal yard, the stock pens, the grist mill, a sash and door factory, the egg grading station, the cheese factory, all, it was known as the industrial park of Altsville. But this was, and it grew up at the north end of Altsville because of the Grand Trunk Railroad going through, and you can see that the railroad, and that pole for the, does it look crooked there? The bed didn't. It wasn't. It was only the picture when we took the photograph was bent a little bit. But here you have the cheese factory smokestack, and you can see this is Jarvis and Shaver's store. There's the egg grading station, and everything else was up in behind, right along the railroad. Great spot. There, Mr. Jarvis in his store. The interesting thing here, the Jell-O. There are some labels here. Cow brand baking soda, yeah, right over there. Same box. Cow brand baking soda comes in the same box that you had back in the 50s. There's the declining days of Jarvis and Shaver's store. Shaver, by the way, was the member of Parliament. He was quite influential in the town, but it's succumbed. This is a swing bridge, a little pedestrian bridge that brought you from downtown Altsville over to a little island. The island was set up as a park by the Altsville Men's Club, and they also built this bridge so people could go over there and enjoy an afternoon. So this is Frances Bedingfield and her son Johnny on the bridge. Ferns Point was known as the Brick Town because it had two brickyards. It had the Elliott Brickyard and it had the McConnell Brickyard. And almost all the buildings in the town were made of brick. That's why when you go into Ingleside today, you see very few houses in Ingleside from Altsville, only because none of the brick houses from Altsville were moved. None of them. They were all destroyed. So that's why they moved some frame homes from Altsville back to Ingleside, but there aren't many. But it was known, and you can see, if you look at that, you can see a lot of red in that picture, and that's only because they were made of brick. This is the Dr. Hickey. It was his home, and that was his office entrance over there. A beautiful big brick home right along the front. This is a very famous picture of Altsville. In fact, we have one of our members who lives up in the Northwest Territories, and we had, during COVID, a Zoom meeting, and he was sitting in his office, and the whole wall, he had this image reproduced. He has a heart for Altsville. He had an image made that the whole wall in his office has this in it, and it was rather eerie to see him sitting there. You'd think that he was sitting on a stool out in the middle of the street there in Altsville. This is the Alt home. This is the Alts for generations lived in that house, and the last Alt to live in that house, he was buried about a month ago. Passed away, and he was buried at the Saint Lawrence Valley Union Cemetery. But it was just before COVID that we received a carpet, a handmade carpet out of that home that we have at the Stewart House. People have been so generous to us. We're very fortunate. This is an aerial view taken from a Cessna airplane looking down. The zebra mussels have cleaned up the lake so much that you can see streets. In fact, that Alt home that I just shown was right on that site right there. And this is a sidewalk. That's a sidewalk that went down to the wharf. The wharf was right down about here. And that corner, that brick corner with all those brick buildings, that's right up, that's the intersection right here. This image was taken by a photo artist who now lives in Australia. He's a member of the Historical Society, still contributes and what he can. But he did quite a show. In fact, he launched his show in Toronto when I was in Parliament, and I cut the ribbon at a gallery up there, and it was amazing the stuff that he was able to.
So about how deep is the water there?
It's not very deep.
30 feet?
Was that?
Like 20 feet? Or?
15, probably. 50. In fact, when the water is dropped, that main street,
You can see it.
you can see, you can walk on it. You can walk on it. Yeah. This is the high school and the public school in behind. And this is one of the 11 buildings that the National Research Council of Canada, they came down to Altsville and they wanted to study combustion in 11 buildings, and that study brought us to having smoke detectors and smoke alarms. That the National Research Council did that. So the Alteville burns. There's a beer called Alteville Burns. There's an image of this burning on the can. An artist did an image. So here's where Alteville is. This is the whole thing is where Alteville used to be, and there's nothing there. We come to the museum site. I throw this in. This is right across the road from our museum. This house is one that was relocated. It was a brick house. Now, an interesting story with the house is that Hydro would not move that house. Stanley McNairn, he was a descendant of a United Empire loyalist and fiercely loyal to his British roots and to his Canadian roots with British stock. Anyway, he wanted his house moved. That was down in Maple Grove, down near the dam site. It was a farmhouse. And Hydro, and he wanted it moved on the south side. There's the new highway that you see right in front of his house. He wanted to be over in where the museum developed. But at the time of the Seaway, Hydro said, no, nobody is going to live on the south side of the new highway. Everybody either goes to the new towns or move out into the country. We won't move your house into the country, but if you decide to move it to Long Sault or, well, from Maple Grove, it would be Long Sault, we'll move it. Well, Stanley wasn't happy. Hydro went to his house to assess it, to find out if it could be moved, and they said, it isn't structurally sound enough to move. Well, that didn't sit well with him. He says, okay, you've made me an offer. I'm going to accept it. He says, but I'm going to keep my house and I'm going to move it. He hired a private contractor to come in, took all the brick off the house. Now, this wasn't a brick veneer house. This is one layer of brick. This is double brick and triple and some. Took all the brick off, cleaned all the bricks up, brought it up to this site on pallets. And Loisel, the mover, now Hartshorn was the big mover. He moved 531 houses. Loisel moved a few. Anyway, Loisel moved it. Now, Loisel made a mistake in his route to get the house up here. He came up the new number 2 highway that was being built. It hadn't been completed. It didn't have an asphalt top on it. The mover got stuck. It was Christmas Eve. Mr. and Mrs. McNairn, with she pregnant for her one and only child, lived in the house over Christmas. They had a wood stove in the kitchen. They had a pantry full of food. The mover got stuck just down the highway, just right over here, not very far from our museum. They had a source of wood. They could get wood if they needed it. And they had chamber pots to go to the bathroom in. Stanley often left that house and came over to our museum, and he would tell these stories to tourists about living in a house over Christmas. And it's just a testament to the tenacity and the power in a person's and determination of doing something, and he did it. He did it. But the house today is right across from the museum. My niece owns it today. The McNairns passed on, and the family sold it, and my niece is now living there. There's another view of the house. Were people satisfied? A good number of them were. Cornwall made a demand. These are the demands from Cornwall. Protection of Cornwall and Canada's interest. They wanted the canal on this side of the river. Didn't happen. You have to go over to New York State to see the Eisenhower and Snell Law. So we had the canals on our side, but they were lost. Suitable rehabilitation for landowners. Well, some of them weren't satisfied at all. And the restoration of recreational areas. Well, we did get recreational areas, but Saint Lawrence Park Commission have let a lot of our front that was to be used for recreation areas grow up. But now they're starting to make deals with the municipalities to do something about that. But here's a man that took it in his own power to make a tombstone and put out at the front of his farm. He was really not satisfied at all. And this image is one that, now we acquired that in 2019. It was the year before COVID. And Alan Day lived in Mill Rush with his parents and sister. And Hydro would not move their house. It was deemed not suitable to move. So they took the money and moved and built a new house back at Cornwall Center. When they went back to their old house, having moved out, the house sat there empty, but there was this sign on the front yard that said no trespassing. Mr. Day said, there's nobody in this world that's going to keep me off the land that I owned until it's flooded. So he ripped that off the tree, and Alan Day inherited it, and he came to one of our meetings. He was on the executive. He came to one of our meetings and he handed it to me, made a presentation, and he said, the monkey is off my back. And then you had this Seaway Sandy doing these cartoons in the paper, and please, no more Seaways for at least 100 years, and all the recent business relocations, traffic congestion, political shenanigans. Sound familiar? Cottage problem, and just a whole lot of things. And there were some people, on the most part, people were satisfied. On the most part, they were leaving their communities that may have had larger lots, and they only had larger lots because they had to have a well and some kind of a septic system on the same lot. So the lots were a little bigger. When they moved into Long Sault, they were on smaller lots because they hooked them up to municipal water and sewer and new furnace in the basement. So there were a lot of people. Some of these people didn't have indoor plumbing. I think I already said that. But it culminated in this big day, inundation day, July 1st, 1958, when the last dam, right here between Barnhart Island and Sheik Island, that dam was holding back the water that would go into the head pond and then back up and flood 40,000 acres of land. And how far did it go west? If you know where Cardinal is the Iroquois, then Cardinal, the starch mill at Cardinal, they had to rejig one of their gates there because the water wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. A very quick trip around our museum. There's the Molinet Station, the Ziny Hill Barber Shop, the Manson Lapeer store. Those were moved from Molinet, and those two buildings from Mill Rush by farmers. That barber shop, for example, was and the train station were purchased by farmers for $10 each, and it was only basically to make a deal, to make it legal. My dad bought a garage for $10, and he didn't move it as a structure. He had all these kids that could pull nails and straighten nails, so he tore it down and put it back together again. And then we have the log house. That was our first museum. Schoolhouse, Sandtown Church, and that's the memorial stone right between the school and the church. That stone was over on Sheik Island, and that stone is the bronze plaque that was on it until it was stolen last fall. It's being now replaced with a stone one. It honors Simon William Alt, it's called Alt Park, and his wife Caroline Brownell. So that's my association to Alt Park and to all this, because that's another one of my ancestors. They were well known in the area. This is our archives on the left. That's where I spend most of my time now. I can't climb ladders or do a whole lot of stuff like that, but I can spend a lot of time. And then I already showed you the Stewart House. And as every presentation has to come to an end, I have come to a dead end because this road has come to a dead end because you can see it's been flooded. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's time for, I could entertain a couple questions if you have any. It's all told in here. Enhanced history. It's available on Amazon, and there will be 10 copies here at the end of July. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Actually,